Spider-Man has been featured in numerous movies and hundreds of TV episodes, and many actors have gotten a chance to portray the iconic web-slinger. Here's a look at the major versions of Spider-Man from TV and movies, as well as the actors who played them, ranked from worst to best. It isn't Nicolas Hammond's fault that barely anybody remembers the short-lived Amazing Spider-Man TV show from the late 1970s. He just didn't have much to work with. With no supervillains and only several familiar faces from the comics, Hammond's take on the character feels less like a superhero and more like a regular guy in a red jumpsuit. The Amazing Spider-Man aired on CBS alongside The Incredible Hulk, but while the latter show turned out to be a hit that defined the character for years, Amazing Spider-Man would only ever be a footnote in Spider-Man's long history. Spider-Man Unlimited was an attempt to extend the 90s animated series past its sell-by date by recasting Spider-Man and sending him to a darker alternate Earth. Rino Romano does very little to make the character his own, instead making an effort to sound exactly like his predecessor, Christopher Daniel Barnes. His costume, inspired by the Spider-Man 2099 comics, certainly looks cool, but would probably have fit better in an actual Spider-Man 2099 cartoon adaptation. Paul Soles as Spider-Man sounds the way people in the 1960s expected a superhero to sound, which means his voice is a little deeper than the depictions of Peter Parker we see today. Soles does his best getting into the role, but it's clear that this first Spider-Man cartoon, which ran from 1967 to 1970, isn't very interested in characterization. This version of Spider-Man is perhaps best remembered today as the star of many animated GIFs. The 1981 Spider-Man animated series isn't bad by any means. The animation is solid for the time, and it brings in a lot of villains from the comics who'd never gotten TV time before. Ted Schwartz does an admirable job bringing this iteration of Spider-Man to life, bringing more individuality to the role than most had before him. The strange thing about this show is that it was immediately overshadowed by a different Spider-Man cartoon. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which premiered the same day, features more Marvel heroes and a stronger lead performance by Dan Gilvezan. The two series also feature nearly identical animation styles and character designs, which can make for a disorienting viewing experience. Unfortunately for Schwartz, this is a series that many have chosen to forget.
Boy, some days it hardly pays to be a lovable superhero.
Spider-Man's very first live-action appearance was on The Electric Company, a 1970s educational series that ran on PBS. This Spider-Man doesn't talk and never appears out of costume, but his simple adventures and easily described actions are the perfect vehicle for teaching kids basic language and math skills. The show also has a lot of fun bringing the comic book aesthetic to life, with Danny Seagren often framed by comic book panels and speaking with the aid of word balloons. It's a trick to get children to read, of course, but it does so with plenty of fun and personality. Admittedly, this is kind of an odd one. In 1990, Spider-Man starred in a short PSA about child abuse that was distributed to schools and libraries. There's no Green Goblin or Mysterio here, just a father who hits his daughter and a group of kids who turn to Spider-Man for help. Spider-Man tells them that violence is never the answer and recommends a hotline to call. Spider-Man doesn't have a whole lot to do here since the spotlight is on the kids, but he's well portrayed by veteran voice actor Greg Snegoff, credited here as Gregory Snow. He's reminiscent of the 80s animated Spider-Man and, more importantly, has a warmth to him when interacting with troubled children. He comes off as an adult you can trust, which is both perfect for this cartoon and exactly what Spider-Man should be. Given time and a Spider-Verse sequel or two, this Spider-Man of the future could potentially move much higher on this list. After all, Spider-Man 2099, aka geneticist Miguel O'Hara, has a cult following all his own. On top of that, he's voiced by the incredibly popular Oscar Isaac of Star Wars and Ex Machina fame. The problem, of course, is that he's barely in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse at all, appearing only in the film's after-credits sequence. It's fun to see him reenact a famous meme from the 60s Spider-Man show, but it's an inauspicious beginning for Miguel. We can only hope that he'll have more of a presence in Spider-Verse 2. Two big things are distracting about 2003's Spider-Man: The New Animated Series, a more mature take on the comics that aired on MTV of all places. The first is the animation, which combines 2D cartooning with 3D computer modeling in an incredibly awkward way. The second is that every time Neil Patrick Harris's version of Spider-Man talks, it's hard not to imagine Doogie Howser or Barney Stinson under the red and blue suit. Harris wasn't a bad choice for Spider-Man at the time, but it's difficult to accept him as Peter Parker today when his voice has become so recognizable as a musical TV star. Out of all the Spider-Man cartoons since the 60s, this one has probably aged the worst. Everybody loves Miles Morales, the modern teenage Spider-Man created by Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli in 2011 for Marvel's now-defunct Ultimate Comics line. Even when the Ultimate line ended, Miles and his supporting cast managed to survive thanks to his popularity and the unique flavor he adds to the Spider-Man franchise. Unfortunately, bringing him into the 2017 Spider-Man animated series just didn't work that well. Rather than originating from an alternate dimension, this version of Miles, played by Nadji Jeter, is nothing more than a school friend of Peter Parker's who gains his own powers and dons his own costume. When he first goes into action, he's portrayed as a sloppy and overly enthusiastic hero who initially does a very bad job. Peter has to act as a coach and mentor despite being somewhere around Miles' age. The whole storyline feels shoehorned in and robs Miles Morales of much of what makes him such a compelling character. Gwen Stacy has been a part of Spider-Man's story in the comics since 1965, but it's only recently she's gained superpowers of her own. Known to the world as Spider-Woman and to her friends as Spider-Gwen, this web-slinger has been a fan favorite since she first donned the white and pink suit in 2014. The Gwen Stacy of the 2017 Spider-Man series, however, suffers from a similar problem as Miles Morales. She's a schoolmate of Peter's, rather than the main Spider-Person of her own world. Unfortunately, this take on Gwen seems less like her own superhero and more like just another Spidey sidekick. Perhaps this show chose to avoid introducing a multiverse because Into the Spider-Verse was already in production, but both Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales feel like cheap imitations of their Spider-Verse incarnations as a result. Still, veteran voice actor Laura Bailey does her best with the material she's given. While LEGO Productions are known for drawing heavily from their source material, 2015's Avengers Reassembled actually came out before Spider-Man's first MCU appearance in Captain America: Civil War. With no Tom Holland performance to base LEGO Peter Parker off of, this plastic take on Spidey is a bit generic compared to his counterparts that aren't made out of bricks. Still, Ben Diskin gives it his all in the role, as he continues to do in the role of Flash Thompson in the 2017 Spider-Man series. Once the MCU established their own Spider-Man, however, the LEGO one had to evolve a bit to keep up. Cole Howard is an experienced and talented young voice actor, and his work in 2020's LEGO Marvel Avengers Climate Conundrum certainly fits the character of Peter Parker. However, it's fairly clear that Howard got the part because his Spider-Man voice sounds very much like Tom Holland's. Howard's Spider-Man comes off as a bit younger and a lot sillier than Holland's live-action performance, but the similarity is still unmistakable. For LEGO Marvel Avengers, which is basically the movies but sillier and aimed at younger audiences, Cole Howard is doing exactly what's needed for the part. We're ranking these three Spider Kids from the Disney Junior series as a group rather than individually because, frankly, these versions just aren't quite distinctive enough to warrant their own entries. Spidey and His Amazing Friends is aimed at preschool kids, which means all the sharp corners are pretty much sanded off. Of course, that doesn't mean it's a bad show. It's pleasant and likable enough, with each episode featuring two short adventures in which the Spidey team faced similarly aged-down supervillains and learn lessons about sharing and so forth. The villains include a really great female Doc Ock, who's basically a little girl version of Catherine Hahn from Into the Spider-Verse.
Give it up, Doc Ock. You can't handle the Spidey team. But can you handle the might of Giganticus Squishy?
As far as characterization goes, however, there's just not much going on in a show like this. The Spidey team is voiced by actual kids, and talented ones at that, which does add to the show's unique energy. As kids shows go, this one certainly could be a lot worse, but it's not where adult fans are going in search of great takes on Spider-Man and his friends. The very first Spider-Man introduced in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the Peter Parker of Miles Morales' Earth, voiced by the absurdly charismatic Chris Pine. He's the big-time hero of New York and basically the perfect Spider-Man. He even has blonde hair, unlike any other version of Peter Parker, to mark him as a literal golden boy. The problem, however, is that a flawless Spider-Man doesn't feel like a Spider-Man at all. The whole point of the character is that he's a flawed hero, and nothing ever seems to go right for him. This Spider-Man isn't in the movie to be a character of his own, though. He's there to provide an idealized image that conflicts with the inexperienced Miles and the slovenly Peter B. Parker. Plus, making him the perfect superhero makes the tragedy of his death that much greater, especially as he leaves behind a legacy that Miles must try and live up to. Although the original Spider-Man Noir comic, where this version of Peter Parker originated, is quite a serious affair, the version of him that appears in Into the Spider-Verse is essentially a one-note joke character. Still, thanks to plenty of great lines and a flawless voice performance by the peerless Nicolas Cage, he's an extremely funny joke character.
Sometimes I let matches burn down to my fingertips just to feel something, anything. Oh.
Not only does Spider-Man Noir sound like a perfectly hard-boiled detective, he also looks extremely striking, rendered entirely in black and white halftone in a colorful world. If he comes back in Spider-Verse 2, it might be fun to get to know him a little better, but even if we don't, we're still incredibly glad to have seen him in action. The 1978 Japanese Spider-Man live-action TV series has developed a cult following in the US, even though it's never been officially released here. It was produced by the Toei Company, who later created Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and they infused Spider-Man with a similar tokusatsu vibe. Shinji Tôdô plays Spider-Man's face and voice, while Hirofumi Koga does much of the performing inside the Spider Protector suit. In this series, Spider-Man is a motorcycle driver named Takuya Yamashiro, who gets his spider powers from a super bracelet from the planet Spider. Mostly, he does what American Spider-Man does, climbing walls, spinning webs, and so forth. Being a true tokusatsu hero, he also has a race car and a giant robot named Leopardon. The show is a lot of fun, and Tôdô and Koga both do a great job, but it drifts pretty far from Spider-Man as we understand him. These days, its primary appeal is definitely the camp factor. A far more streamlined and spidery mech than Leopardon, Peni Parker's Spider isn't nearly as big, but it has a lot more personality. It's also co-piloted by an actual spider that has a psychic link with young Peni, played by Kimiko Glenn. Together, they're the spider heroes of a New York in the year 3145 that exists somewhere out in the Spider-Verse. Peni and Spider are inspired by Japanese mecha anime like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Gundam. Although Peni doesn't get too much character development, she's a great example of just how far a spider hero can get from the standard template we've seen time and time again. She also provides some emotional punch in the final battle as Spider sacrifices himself to save Peni. Fortunately, she's able to save her spider friend from inside the mech, so hopefully they'll be able to rebuild upon returning to their own dimension. Of all the secondary spider people in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Ham is by far the silliest. That works for him though. In fact, it's kind of the whole point. Spider-Ham is essentially a Looney Tunes character down to his silhouette resembling Porky Pig. He's even mastered cartoon physics, making him one of the most unpredictable fighters the Spider-Verse has to offer.
What are you? Some kind of silly cartoon?
Spider-Ham's on-screen appearance is a departure from the original comic book version of the character, who starred in 1985's Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. There, he's a little more serious, working alongside other animal Avengers like Captain Americat and Iron Mouse. In Into the Spider-Verse, however, the silliness of Spider-Ham makes for some of the movie's funniest moments, largely thanks to a fantastic voice performance from comedian John Mulaney. By 2017, it was pretty established in the minds of fans what a teenage Peter Parker should sound like, and Robbie Daymond nails it. Aside from that, however, not much about this version of the character feels fresh or new. The 2017 Spider-Man is a solid, engaging animated series, but it's all kind of been done already. It's fun to see Spider-Man team up with other Marvel heroes like Iron Man, Black Widow, and the Hulk, but storylines featuring multiple web-slinging characters lack the spark that made them memorable in Into the Spider-Verse. Sometimes it feels like the most daring part of this Spider-Man incarnation is the way his belt doesn't quite fully connect on the front of his costume. Still, if you're looking for a solid Spider-Man voice performance, you could do a lot worse than Robbie Daymond. Back in the early days of 21st century superhero movies, years before the MCU, Tobey Maguire got the job done. He got in great physical shape for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and its sequels, but kept the charmingly goofy face that made Peter Parker a relatable figure for audiences of all ages. While he never quite seems like a kid the way an early career Spider-Man should, he's young looking enough to sell a teenage performance, even though he was in his late 20s when production began. In the emotional scenes, Maguire's always a little over the top, but he makes up for it with fun quips and killer dance moves. He's definitely a solid Spider-Man, but nothing to write home about. Ultimate Spider-Man was controversial from day one. For one thing, it replaced the popular Spectacular Spider-Man series, which ended due to character rights issues after Disney purchased Marvel in 2009. Some fans grew even more irritated when Drake Bell of Drake and Josh fame was hired to voice the title character, expecting that this version of the character would be geared for a younger, less mature audience. However, if you ignore any bad publicity, Bell is actually a pretty great animated Spider-Man. He has a high capacity for silliness and fun, as Spider-Man always should, but he also comes through in the darker moments that require a more emotional Peter Parker. Although this iteration of Spider-Man may not have gotten the same rave reviews that Spectacular Spider-Man's Peter Parker did, Bell certainly does the job. The biggest problem with Andrew Garfield in The Amazing Spider-Man is that he always looked too old for the part. Garfield may have made a good adult Peter Parker if the script wrote him as such, but a nearly 30-year-old man in the role of a bullied high schooler is a hard sell to the point that it almost never stops being distracting. Even still, Garfield's take on the wall crawler has plenty going for him. He looks good in the suit, his comedic timing is on point, and his chemistry with Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy makes for one of the best romantic storylines that Spider-Man media has to offer. Garfield is a fine transitional Spider-Man, but not exactly the type that would have worked best in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For a lot of millennials, Christopher Daniel Barnes was the definitive voice of Spider-Man during their childhood, having played the role on Fox Kids from 1994 to 1998. While this Spider-Man series has aged a little awkwardly, it was the first Spider-Man TV show to draw on the comic's storylines in a nuanced way, introducing characters like Venom and even the Punisher to Saturday morning viewers. This series saves the origin story for the theme song and begins with Peter Parker already in college and freelancing for the Daily Bugle. Within that context, Barnes is perfect in the part, balancing the jokes and the emotional baggage that are both so central to Spider-Man. With its solid characterization and season-long story arcs, this show is one of the best takes on grown-up Peter Parker that you can find. For those a little older, Dan Gilvezan is the Saturday morning Spider-Man of choice. He voices the wall-crawling hero on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, a show that brought the Marvel Universe to life from 1981 until 1983. Gilvezan was a mainstay of 1980s animation, also known for his roles as Bumblebee in Transformers and Cooler in Pound Puppies. His Spider-Man has the lightness that earlier versions of the character had been missing, while still seeming more grounded than his goofier friend Iceman, played by Frank Welker. This cartoon may seem pretty silly by today's standards, but this was the first time Spider-Man really felt like the Spider-Man we all know today, and that's worth something. Despite failing to gain momentum in the 2017 cartoon, Spider-Gwen thankfully got her chance to shine as one of the numerous Spider People featured in Into the Spider-Verse. As the one and only Spider hero of her world, this incarnation of Gwen Stacy was motivated to protect New York City by the death of her best friend Peter Parker before getting sucked into an extra-dimensional wormhole. Despite rocky first impressions, Gwen becomes a close friend to Miles, and despite a hint of romantic tension, there's nothing too forced or mushy to distract from daring heroics. As far as Spider People go, Spider-Gwen is one of the strongest. While Miles is new to the game and Peter B's glory days are behind him, Gwen is in the prime of her superhero career. She's graceful, strong, and always helpful in a pinch. Hailee Steinfeld gives a standout voice performance as Gwen with the perfect mix of youthful enthusiasm and effortless ability. She's not exactly Spider-Man, but as far as spider people go, she's one of the best. Peter Parker has always been a bit of a sad sack, but Peter B. Parker from Into the Spider-Verse takes it to a whole new level. As the hero of New York for over 2 decades, the years have taken their toll on Peter. As he approaches 40, he finds himself broke, separated from his wife Mary Jane, and gaining a noticeable punch. He's the natural endpoint of Peter Parker's bad luck, and the exact opposite of the Spider-Man that Miles Morales grew up seeing. However, once he realizes it's up to him to mentor young Miles in the art of web-slinging, he rediscovers the hero he's always been deep down. This is a take on Peter Parker that's never quite been seen before and wouldn't work in most contexts, but in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, he's perfect, hilarious, and ultimately touching. Jake Johnson, star of TV's New Girl, is the perfect choice to voice this version of the character, and gives a surprisingly nuanced performance. He may not be the best or the most powerful Spider-Man, but he might just be the most endearing one. Spectacular Spider-Man is considered by many to be the perfect 21st century Spider-Man cartoon, and one that ended far too soon for frustrating reasons. It ran for 2 seasons from 2008 to 2009 and was being considered for a third when Disney bought Marvel and reacquired the television rights to Spider-Man, leaving this Sony-produced series in legal limbo, unable to continue. Spectacular Spider-Man takes Peter Parker back to high school with a unique new design aesthetic that fits perfectly. Voice actor Josh Keaton plays this youthful Spider-Man with the earnestness of a kid trying to do his best, and he couldn't have done a better job. It's just a shame we couldn't have seen more of him. Despite being the 3rd live-action Spidey inside of a decade, Tom Holland's take on Peter Parker was a fan favorite from the moment the world first saw him steal the vibranium shield in the trailer for Captain America: Civil War. Unlike Maguire and Garfield, however, Holland has the authentic look and feel of an anxious teenager who's gotten himself way in over his head. The genuine youthfulness and naivete of Holland's portrayal of Peter Parker contrasts perfectly with the adult heroes of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially Iron Man. Tony Stark's mentorship of Peter adds serious emotional depth to both characters in a way no other version of Spider-Man has done. While Spider-Man is a character defined by tragedy, no other actors have captured the raw emotion of Peter Parker quite as effectively as Holland has, as we've witnessed in one of the most emotionally devastating moments the MCU has to offer.
I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir. Please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
As far as his solo efforts go, Holland's Peter Parker is an awkward yet charismatic young hero who's still finding his place in the world, trying to balance the life of an honor student with the life of a superhero. Even though he's constantly having to clean up his own mistakes wherever he goes, he comes across as inexperienced without ever seeming incompetent, and by the end of Far From Home, he's become a hero that Tony Stark would be proud of. All of this is topped off with a technological marvel of a costume, which gives Spider-Man the opportunity to be more expressive than any other live-action version of him had been before. Details like this, combined with Tom Holland's stellar performance, make for the best Peter Parker outside of the comics themselves. With apologies to all versions of Peter Parker, Miles Morales is the Spider-Man of the future. He's energetic, he's artistic, and as the son of a black father and a Puerto Rican mother, he represents the changing face of America in the best possible light. As someone who grew up in Spider-Man's friendly neighborhood, Miles finds himself with some pretty big shoes to fill after the death of his world's Peter Parker. However, with some help from his family and a half dozen other Spider people, Miles is able to figure out his abilities and become the hero his city needs. It's more than just his background that makes Miles' Spider-Man unique, however. His invisibility and Venom Strike abilities eventually make him a fearsome foe for baddies like Kingpin. Despite all the Spider people who appear throughout Into the Spider-Verse, it's Miles' story first and foremost. And just as it's the best Spider-Man movie ever made, it shows how Miles has the potential to be the best Spider-Man. It certainly helps that he's voiced by Shameik Moore from The Get Down, who embodies the character flawlessly. It's only a matter of time until we see Miles in live action, whether he's replacing Peter Parker or working alongside him. Miles Morales is the future of Spider-Man, and the future is bright. Check out one of our newest videos right here, plus even more Looper videos about your favorite Marvel characters are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.